Not a lot of snow locally, but certainly tons of ice.
When you wake up in the morning, you just can't, you think it's a dream until reality sets in.
It's pretty bad. You know, there's lines down everywhere, trees are down.
It's been a rough stretch, you know, a lot of without power. It's tough.
Look out for your neighbor, please, because we just can't get to everybody's household.
It is frigid outside, so if you know somebody who doesn't have power, encourage them to go someplace warm.
Come to the shelter and seek refuge here.
There are 11 hotels along Wolf Road here, and every one of them is full.
We're just lucky to find a hotel in Albany that had a room, so we're going to get some sleep tonight. We don't know what we'll go home to, though.
It's clear we need all hands on deck.
Just be patient. We're doing the best we can do.
Any idea when you're going to go home?
They haven't told us.
To all those who are offering shelter in their homes to family and friends, we want to thank them.
I'm 90 years old, never saw anything like this before in my lifetime.
It's been more than 15 years since a winter storm blanketed the capital region with ice. But for many of us who lived here then, the memory is clear as day. The rain started falling on the night of Thursday, December 11th, freezing on contact. By Friday morning, much of the area was covered with up to an inch of ice. 300,000 homes and businesses lost power. Some didn't see it return for up to a week. The First Warning Weather Team, Reed Kesselbeck, Christina Talamo, Juanique Martinez, Rachel Teedy, and myself, along with Caitlin Erla, is taking a look back at the storm that brought holiday shopping to a halt and crippled the capital region for days. The Ice Storm Nightmare, sponsored by Marcella's Appliance Center and Ambrose Electric. News Channel 13 was out in the community in the days following the storm, bringing critical updates on power restoration efforts and the stories of our friends and neighbors just trying to make it through the nightmare. Rachel Teedy heads back into the news vault.
December 11th, 2008, freezing rain spread over the capital region and continued all night and into the next morning, December 12th. Trees, tree limbs, and power lines all buckled under massive ice buildup. Hundreds of thousands of capital region residents woke up to no power. People prepared for the long haul as forecasts worsened. Ice melt was in high demand, but spirits were still high.
It's not bad. We got four-wheel drive, and I'm hoping the school buses can all make it to school tomorrow on time.
What's your answer to that?
I don't want to go to school.
He didn't have to worry. School closings began coming in that night, and by the next morning, most kids had the day off.
Albany is closed, North Colony, South Colony, North Warren, Guilderland, Cohoes, Mechanicville, Saratoga, Shen, Schenectady, Troy. You know, the big ones, and everybody else is falling in place.
Many people decided to simply leave their cold, dark homes for a place with power and heat. Shelters opened across the area. A godsend for this senior couple.
I'm 90 years old, never saw anything like this before in my lifetime.
It was terrible, very bitter cold. And for him at his age, we couldn't keep him there.
Then there was this mom with 6 kids.
When you're a mom and you have no power, no heat, you have to get your kids to a safe place. And being that the Red Cross is here for us, we have power, we're warm. It means the world.
National Grid said it was the largest army assembled in this area in more than 10 years. Crews came from as far as Ohio and Michigan, and they had their work cut out for them. Some working 17 hours for 6 days.
Had to cancel a few Christmas plans already, but we'll do them in January.
Linemen repairing damage in individual neighborhoods were still at the mercy of the big substations. Until those were fixed, their hands were tied.
While those guys are working on the substation issues, we're trying to put up everything we can out here so when they've got power, they can throw a switch and you'll have power. That's the best I can tell you.
In the end, the storm caused millions of dollars in damage and memories that are frozen in time for people who lived through one of the biggest natural disasters in capital region history. Opening News Vault 13, I'm Rachel Teedy.
I'm meteorologist Christina Talamo, joined here with meteorologist Reed Kesselbeck and Chief Meteorologist Paul Cayano to talk a little bit about their memories and experiences from the ice storm back in December 2008. And Paul, you were actually working that day. Now, what was that like?
Well, I did the morning show, so I had to get up really early, and obviously when there's big storms, we get up even extra early, right? So we already had some ice coming down, freezing rain from the night before, and it really did shock me when I looked out my window. I just remember this one image that still sticks in my head. I was driving down Route 9 past Siena College toward Albany, toward Menands here, and there's that point where there's a lot of trees, and they were all just weighted down, and they were almost hanging over and onto the road, and I was going through it like it was a tunnel, and it was just like a tunnel of ice crystals. So that was just getting into work. Thankfully, nothing fell, but you can see the power line snapping and some sparks flying. So luckily, I got in here, and the first thing I did...
You made it.
I made it here safely, but the first thing I did was I called the news director at 2:30 in the morning and said, we better get everybody that we have on this because this is going to be a pretty big storm.
The front tracks away, drying things out for the afternoon today.
Forecasting an ice storm is extremely challenging, even more so than a snowstorm. Temperatures have to line up just right and be below freezing at ground level while above freezing aloft. This is the opposite of what usually occurs. Not only that, to get significant ice buildup, these conditions have to occur for several hours in a row. For these reasons, it's almost impossible to forecast significant icing for a specific location more than a day ahead of time. Even on the morning of the December 2008 ice storm, we knew there would be a storm, but it looked cold enough for snow in the immediate capital district. Freezing rain looked more likely in our southern counties.
So significant icing is possible, especially Albany points south and east into the Berkshires and parts of the Hudson Valley and easternmost Catskills. Snow to the north and west of these areas, and of course significant and substantial snowfall possible overnight into tomorrow morning in those locations.
In fact, the National Weather Service had issued ice storm warnings for Greene, Columbia, and Berkshire counties, while a winter storm warning for snow was issued for the Greater Capital District and points north.
A winter storm warning out for the Greater Capital District, North Country, out into the Mohawk Valley and Adirondacks, and all of Vermont and parts of New Hampshire if you're traveling out that way. We also have an ice storm warning for parts of the Berkshires and also the Hudson Valley in Greene County and in Columbia County. The predominant precipitation type in these locations will be mainly rain, but into the air that's at or below freezing, so we may have a pretty good ice buildup. And in these locations, we could be talking about some down tree limbs and power lines because of that ice buildup.
All it takes is a 1 degree difference in temperature to go from all rain to all snow. And in some cases, when the temperatures walk that fine line near freezing, we get icing. This is why it's important to keep up with the latest forecast. This was exactly the case in 2008.
Researching about the storm, and obviously everyone talks about this specific storm when you talk about ice storms in the capital region, and just some of the photos are just absolutely incredible. We say, you know, it looked really pretty out there, but obviously just a horrible, horrible thing.
And ice storms are interesting because first of all, they're very difficult to maintain because it's like walking a tightrope. It could very easily be sleet or snow, and on the other side, it could very easily be just plain rain. But to maintain that perfect temperature, both at the surface and aloft, for us to get just freezing rain hour after hour and then heavy rain on top of that, so they don't happen that often to that degree.
During the winter season, precipitation takes on a few different forms. Each type of precipitation relates to the temperature profiles for the layers of the atmosphere from the base of a cloud down to the surface. For each type of scenario, cold air is located right below the cloud base, and the precipitation starts as snow when it is cold enough aloft. Rain happens when the frozen precipitation melts as it falls through an above freezing column of air while it travels towards the ground. Freezing rain occurs when snow melts as it falls through a large column of warm air, similar to just plain rain. The difference is that in this scenario, the liquid rain droplets encounter a shallow column of colder air near the surface. This causes the droplets to freeze on contact. Sleet forms when frozen precipitation turns to liquid as it moves through a smaller portion of warm air. It then encounters a deeper layer of below freezing air near the ground. The melted drops refreeze in the colder environment. For both freezing rain and sleet, warm air is wedged between two below freezing layers. The smaller sliver of cold air near the surface creates a sheet of thin ice in the case of freezing rain. The layer of ice can coat surfaces, trees, and power lines, which may lead to hazardous conditions during the winter months. For sleet, the deeper column of air creates ice pellets that can bounce on contact. This form can also cause issues, especially if it accumulates. For snow, you need temperatures at or below freezing through the entire column. Thus, the snow never melts as it falls to the surface.
Reed, you remember the event because you were 13 at the time, right?
I was 13. I remember going to bed and hearing the heavy rain going down, and then to see everything all iced over in the morning. I remember not being able to really go out in the parking lots too well. There was no traffic lights, but we had no power for 3 days. And so we actually ended up staying, my family, with the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet for those 3 days. So that was certainly an interesting experience as a 13-year-old. But I'm very grateful for their hospitality if they're watching. Thank you, because it was a good time with them for sure. And I do remember just driving into school and those longer drives, because I was in a different spot now, seeing, like Paul said, all the trees just kind of bent over, the power lines really far down, and seeing all the trees that were just snapped and bent, and then being outside, how eerily quiet it was because nobody had power.
Those lingering power outages crippled parts of the capital region for days. When we come back, you'll hear from the linemen who spent brutal days in the cold working to get the lights back on. Rachel Teedy also has the story of how one family was able to find what may have been the last generator in the 518 area code.
Our coverage, which we've been showing a lot of, really showed the intensity of how much ice we had, with just everything coated and layered in ice. So it wasn't so much a travel issue as it was a power issue.
It almost felt kind of like a competition at school, because you would come in every day and people were like, I finally got power back, I got power back. And you got down to like the last few, and we're like, who's gonna be the last one? And there was, I think it was one of my friends in Clifton Park who was the last one to get power on, but it took them pretty much the whole school week before they got that power back.
For people living on Fairlawn Drive in Latham, they've become pros at operating a generator, waiting for 5 days now for power. The streets surrounding 77-year-old Jack Wilcox's home all have power back.
All around us.
Does that add to it a little?
Well, yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it does. But you can only go so fast, and we've been around the neighborhood, and there's been some awful devastation around here.
And I know that's even more frustrating for people when they see the lights go on in the houses next to them, and the lights aren't on there, but they will be.
So even long after the storm had ended in terms of the actual rain, freezing rain coming down, there were still power outages going on long after that. We lost power at my house on Friday evening. We only lost it for 2 days. I say only because I know people lost it for a lot longer. My kids were 3 and 1.5, and I built a fire in our fireplace, and we all just slept in front of the fireplace for 2 days. And it was warm, but it wasn't as warm as regular heat in the house, but you had to make do with what you had.
For many families, the ice storm brings back memories of power outages, cold homes, and a logistical nightmare. But for some families, it reminds them of good times with friends.
I opened up the front door and I literally could just hear trees snapping everywhere.
And what John Ainsley saw was a familiar sight for many in the capital region that day. Ainsley lives in Averill Park, as he did 15 years ago, and that day he knew they had to act quickly.
I said to my wife, we're going to have a problem. We're going to lose power at some point.
So they booked a room at the Homewood Suites on Wolf Road, and they were not the only ones. Ainsley's neighbor, Joseph Tessitore, did the same thing, and so did some of their other neighbors.
An absolute pandemonium for me personally. Started off with good intentions. All the guys, all of our friends from up the hill, the Ainsleys, a bunch of families, we all went to a hotel.
But life started to catch up. Tessitore's daughter struggled in the hotel. She had an asthma attack and had to be brought to the hospital. That put Tessitore on the brutal hunt for a generator.
I found the last generator in the 518 at a Home Depot.
For families without a generator, it took days for power to come back on. For the Ainsley family, it took 5 days. And that's when they got their storm damage, a waterfall in their home, when the water started to pump with the return of the electricity.
I opened up the door in there, it's our man cave room, and it was like Niagara Falls coming through the ceiling to the floor in there.
To this day, Tessitore says he still has that special generator, but now it's time for an upgrade and a permanent one.
Worked great to this day. Matter of fact, I think I'll say on TV, I'm going to donate to the Ainsley family.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. I'm donating to the Ainsley family.
Maybe it'll help them if and when the next ice storm hits. And maybe these two families will get a repeat of 2008.
It was like being away on a vacation, but under like a duress, but it was awesome.
And Tessitore says he was a bit of a hero too. He helped the folks in his neighborhood get power back on with a phone call to National Grid as his friends were on an easement with NYSEG. He said to the man in charge, "Let these guys go home for Christmas. Let me show them where the broken pole is so they can fix it." According to him, they caved. They fixed the pole and the lights finally turned back on for his neighborhood. Reporting for News Channel 13, I'm meteorologist Rachel Teedy.
When we come back, any business that had power saw a boost in customers looking to pump gas, get a bite to eat, or even just a warm cup of coffee. But perhaps the busiest workers those days were with National Grid. Caitlin Erla will explain what they learned from that storm and what changes they've made to better be prepared for the next one.
My in-laws have a generator, and the big thing became getting fuel for the generators, because with the electricity out, a lot of the gas stations were not operational. So you couldn't just go to the corner gas station and fill up because those weren't working. So you almost had to go to a fuel store. I remember we went to one in Mechanicville to fill up just so that we could run the generator, because, you know, if you're talking about multiple days, you got to have some fuel on hand to be able to do that.
Mike Pulver and Larry Hermans waited a long time to get to the pump at the one station they could find open anywhere in the Kinderhook area, the Storts, at the intersection of routes 9 and 9H.
This is the only station in the area that's got gas.
What are you going to do with all this gas?
I'm going to run my generator with it.
Traffic was stretched out of the parking lot and onto the shoulder of Route 9, waiting to get to the operating pumps.
1, 2, 3, 4 containers.
Yes, for our generator and our neighbor's generator, try to keep them going.
With the McDonald's next door closed, inside the Storts it was also just as busy. 50 people waiting patiently in the various lines.
What are you in line for?
For coffee.
Mm-hmm. How long you been waiting?
About 15 minutes or so.
Marnie Dempsey and her two daughters were just starting their wait, which could take a half an hour.
It's a little late already. We need the coffee.
During the 2008 ice storm, nearly 230,000 National Grid customers lost power. Some were in the dark for more than a week. Since then, National Grid has made several upgrades to help with restoration efforts after a major storm.
I just remember, you know, on the drive in, it was hard just to get to work, right? Between the ice on the roads and trees down everywhere.
Dangerous and destructive. That's how Matthew Barnett remembers the storm.
You would fix something and then you get another problem, and you fix something, you get another problem.
Ice can also stick around for a long time if the temperatures stay below freezing.
It's different than, let's say, a thunderstorm comes through, kind of blows through, knocks stuff down, but then it's sunny after, right? And you fix what you have.
I knew this was going to be a long duration event. It was going to take us a while to get everybody restored.
Michael Marticello describes the storm and the days after as chaotic. National Grid replaced 375 broken poles and 62 transformers, mobilized 1,000 crews from as far away as Ohio and Michigan, and fielded 100,000 phone calls.
There was a number of times we put restored power. 5 minutes later, another tree would come down and knock it out because the ice wasn't melting. It was just too cold.
Over the years, the company has expanded its focus on storm preparedness and response because of more severe weather and an increased reliance on electricity in all of our daily lives.
We certainly would be quite aggressive with that type of forecast. If we were to see that again, in securing crews, bringing them in, getting them in here in advance, getting them set up and ready to work.
Today, National Grid has better processes and procedures in place.
Over the last 15 years, the response from mutual aid contractors has just exploded. Everybody's available. You know, we have mutual aid calls where people are looking for utilities, utility crews. It's just a lot more accessible now than it was back then to get crews quicker.
Michael and Matthew say focusing on the condition and strength of National Grid's system is also a huge part of the equation.
We've invested a lot of money into our system over those past 15 years. Bigger poles, assets that can stand up to the ice a little bit better.
Caitlin Erla, News Channel 13.
I don't know if you remember this. You remember trying to get into your car the day after that coating of ice?
I don't remember, but I'm sure it wasn't easy.
I remember with my parents, because when we had to go into school, the car was just caked in that layer of ice. And usually in an ice storm, you just kind of like give it a little like fist bump really quick, and then it kind of cracks and you can get it. And this one, we were out there for a while, and we're like, give us the ice scraper, and we'd be like smacking it and trying to break it, and we would get, but it was thick. It was almost, I know our area was almost an inch, but not quite, so it was thick.
We'll be right back with our final thoughts.
I think anyone who kind of grew up here or was here during that time remembers this storm. Remarkable ice storm, one of the worst natural disasters to really happen here in the capital region. Have you seen anything like this? I mean, for you, Reed, since or Paul before? Anything that compares?
I mean, for an ice storm, no. And so this is why it's one of the more memorable ones for me, of just even standing outside and hearing the creaking and the cracking sounds of things falling just because the trees couldn't handle the ice anymore. I mean, we've had bad ice storms. I've been out in some of our worst winter storms that we've had in more recent memory, and nothing quite compares to the impact of that one, I would say.
This was one of those fascinating things, I think, about how destructive nature can be, Mother Nature, with these storms, but also how beautiful.
Yeah.
I remember going outside with my camera and just taking pictures of the encased trees across the landscape, and the sun was shining through. It was almost like a prism. You were getting some of these rainbows, and I was taking them from different angles to look up into the tree. And it was remarkable that we're sitting there without power. People are struggling, and we had so much bad going on, right? And then you look outside and it's just beautiful. Right? And so often Mother Nature can be that way, where our most powerful and destructive storms could also be beautiful from the way you see them and your perspective.
Thank you for joining us for this look back at one of the most severe storms in decades for our area. To watch this special again, or even more of our in-depth coverage of the ice storm of 2008, head to our News Channel 13 YouTube page. On behalf of everyone who worked so hard on this show, thank you for watching.